Okay, we're going to get started. Ready, Marcel? So welcome everyone to the Eastside Freedom Library. If you haven't been here before, just a little bit on logistics. There are restrooms downstairs. I want to call your attention to the mural in the stairwell that was painted by local home artist Jerry Yang, based on discussions with focus groups from different communities here on the East Side. We've been here now 4.5 years, and this is the building itself is 101 years old and was built as a Carnegie library. And I always like to tell people that this library was paid for by the blood, sweat, tears, and labor of immigrant iron miners, coal miners, steel workers who made Andrew Carnegie the richest man in America in the early 20th century. And we won't know until we get to heaven ourselves whether giving the money away got him in or not. I don't know. But it means so much to us to be in a building and be able to say to people that where Carnegie got his wealth. And so this is a place that is dedicated to the history and stories of Native people whose land this was, and immigrants who came here in the 19th, 20th, and now 21st centuries to flee the challenges that the global economy and imperialism were wreaking in their parts of the world, and their efforts to create stable communities here on the east side of St. Paul. So that's what this is all about. We're at about 20,000 books, which we never really imagined would happen. All of them have been donated. We've shelved the books by the major collections that were given to us. And so I'm sure some are names that some of you are familiar with. So Hy Berman's books are here, Naomi Sheeman's books, Paul Rabinowitz's books, Fred Ho's books, Donna Gabaccia, David Montgomery. And we feel that their spirits are here in the space. Every time we think we're going to make a bad decision, we ask, what would they do? So we're delighted that you're here, and delighted that Suzanne has fit us into her itinerary as she is traveling the country with this great and very timely book. And so she's going to tell us about the book, read a bit from it, and there are copies of the book available. I also want to thank Vets for Peace and Women Against Military Madness and other organizations that have helped build this event. And we're glad that you all got through the checkpoints between Minneapolis and St. Paul safely, it seems, to get over here. Just barely, yeah. And I'm sure you've noticed how the U.S.-Mexico border looks a lot like Palestine these days. And, no accident, they're all training together. So we appreciate that you're here, and I'm going to turn things over to Suzanne. I'm going to run downstairs and throw the breaker to shut off these units. So one of the things about the age of the building and the state of the building is that we have a really decrepit HVAC system that we're trying to raise like $250,000 to replace. And so we often have a choice between being warm or hearing, or being cool in the summer and hearing. And so I think for the next hour and a half or so, we should put the emphasis on hearing and just sit closer together. Okay.
Thank you. I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight and for having me. Peter's gone, but I want to thank Peter, and I want to thank Veterans for Peace, my friend David Cooley, Jeff Roy, Michael Hard, and so many other people here. who have also hopefully helped to, oh, that's great, isn't it? To bring folks out. I wanted to ask a couple questions about who you all are. How many of you are any of you, do any of you work for the VA?
Retired.
Retired? Ken? Is he sorry? Hey, Ken. Thank you. Great.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
I'm Carol.
Hey, Carol, thank you. What do you do there?
I'm a physical therapist.
Physical therapist?
Me too. Yep.
Great. How many of you are, is there anybody else? And anybody from unions? I know you're from NNU. No, MNA. MNA. Is there any AFG people here? And you're from Newspaper Guild?
IBW retirees.
IBW retirees. Amy?
My dad did. He married in the big VA corporate.
Yeah. How many of you are veterans? Great. And how many of you use the VA? Oh, great. Well, if you're a veteran and you're eligible and you don't use the VA, I would sign up right away because you may need it. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So, how many of you know a lot about the VA, or VA privatization, or? Okay, so, well, let me just tell you a little tiny bit about myself. And I want to just tell you a little bit about the book and the issues and read a passage from the book and then really open it up to questions. And I hope people will speak out about their experiences and concerns. Let me ask you another question before I launch into that. How many of you believe that the United States needs some sort of national health system? So you may not be veterans, but this book is very important to that struggle. In fact, that struggle about VA privatization is all about national health care. I mean, really, the forces that are trying to kill the VA, a number of them don't really care about health care or veterans, but they hate government, they hate democracy, they hate the idea of people helping each other, they hate anything public, collective, and they don't really care a hoot about veterans, but they want the VHA to be a poster child for why you shouldn't have a national health system. So I started this book project about 5 years ago. I think I cooked it up in my head in 2014 sometime. And I have been writing about healthcare. I'm a healthcare journalist and healthcare researcher. I write a lot about nurses and healthcare systems. I edit a book series for Cornell University Press called Culture and Politics of Healthcare Work. And I'm not a veteran. Actually, I'm a longtime anti-war protester, so I'm very connected to Vietnam veterans because I was out there protesting what was being done to you all, you know. I've been I've been a journalist since 1970, and I've spent way more than half of my career writing about healthcare. I didn't know much about the VA. I mean, it's quite interesting. You know, I don't know how many of you know, but the VA is the largest healthcare system in America. And it's one of the largest healthcare systems in the world. It's not the largest by any means. I'm not sure what rank it is, but it's not insignificant. And it's interesting because I started my career in healthcare writing about nursing. And nursing is sort of like the visibly invisible profession. We don't really understand what nurses do. We don't understand the important contributions that they make. We sort of attribute to doctors, you know, what really should be attributed to nurses, with all due respect to the doctors in the house. We don't do teamwork very well in the American healthcare system. And I became interested in writing about nursing and became very, kind of almost evangelical about how nurses should tell their story, and I've spent years and years and years working with nurses and trying to get them to talk about their work. And when I, you know, confronted this, well, people love us, you know, they trust us, why do we need to talk about our work to them? They, you know, they should get it, really, really, you know. We're in a noble profession, we're caregivers, you know, blah, blah, blah. All kinds of excuses. And when I started writing about the VA, I thought, you know, well, I'm not going to, I'm writing about the VA, I'm not going to find that. And it's really incredible because the parallels are so amazing. You have the largest healthcare system in the country, which is almost invisible to most people. It's visibly invisible. I mean, we all see the VA hospital signs, but how many of us know what goes on there? For example, how many of you know that the VA is, you know, when we talk about the VA, that there's 3 agencies within the VA, right? The Department of Veterans Affairs. This is very important, particularly for journalists or legislators, because what I discovered is when vets complain about the VA, you have to ask them, which one of the 3 agencies are they complaining about? Now, they're probably not complaining about the National Cemetery Administration because they're dead, and, you know, so, I mean, if they're buried, you know, and their families might, I don't really know. And I don't think privatizing that, I'm sure they could get to it, but that's not, you know. Often what they're complaining about is the VBA, the Veterans Benefit Administration. So it's very important to ask, you know, what are you complaining about? And the VBA is the second agency in the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs. And they're tasked with home loans and GI Bill and compensation and pensions, compensation for service-related disabilities, pensions, and judging whether you're eligible for the VHA, which is the largest of the 3 agencies in the VA, and has 300,000-ish employees, 1,700 sites of care-ish, over 150 large hospitals, and 300,000 employees, did I say that? And a third of whom are veterans. And the fight now, and when I'm writing about in Wounds of War, how the VA delivers health, healing, and hope to the nation's veterans, the fight now is about the VHA. Why? Because it's got a, you know, $70 billion plus budget that a lot of hospitals will like to get their hands on, and it's the nation's secret single payer. It's not really single payer, but it's the nation's secret, publicly funded, integrated, socialized healthcare system, and it works. And that's why they're attacking it. If it didn't work, they wouldn't be attacking it. If it didn't work, the Koch brothers, you know, everybody knows, does anybody not know who the Koch brothers is? I mean, which is fine if you don't, but, you know, ultra libertarian energy billionaires, David and Charles Koch, who hate democracy, are offended by democracy, offended by workers' rights, offended by unions, and deeply offended at the idea that people need help and could give it to each other. I mean, they really find this offensive. It's, if you can ever read The Boys from Wichita, probably some of you have read Dark Money, but Boys from Wichita, which is a biography of the Koch brothers, is really fascinating. 4 abused children, 2 of whom are telling us how to run the world. You know, really deeply abused children, and have become abusers, you know, themselves, only kind of writ large. And they are attacking. They have formed a group called Concerned Veterans for America, which is a sort of AstroTurf, quote-unquote, veteran service organization that has no veteran members and provides no services. They are now in the White House, in the VA. And then there's other billionaires like Stephen Cohen, the notorious hedge fund operator. Do folks ever hear Billions, the movie Billions? That was HBO's Billions, was kind of loosely based on Cohen. He had a big hedge fund, Sachs, Stephen A. Cohen Investments. It was the biggest insider trading fraud scandal in American history. He was stopped for 2 years by the SEC from managing other people's money. And he has now started something called Cohen Veterans Network, which is trying to set up a competing mental health system to compete with the VHA. So there's all these people who really are, have it in their sights. The Mercers, Rebecca and Robert, right? They hate the VHA because it's wall-to-wall union, because it's socialized medicine, because it works, and they are determined to crush it. And this book, I didn't set out to write a counter-narrative. I didn't set out to write the real story, but I discovered it after I decided to write the book about the VHA, because I decided that I wanted to see what you could do in a healthcare system, if you had a healthcare system, because we don't have a healthcare system. We have, individual competitors, now consolidating, but, fragmented, disintegrated care. And I got to know, as I tell in this book, some folks in the VHA, and became extremely interested in what you could do if you had a national health system. And then when I started writing the book, I cooked up the idea with Bernie Sanders, who is an old friend and was at that point the head of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and somebody inside the VA who I'd gotten to know. And they sort of organized for me to write this book. I guess, I don't know if Shinseki knew about it, but I was very lucky because I got total entree to the entire country's system. So that's kind of a lot of places. Now I couldn't go to them all, obviously, and there'd have to be 100 of me, and I don't know, probably 100 years, or certainly a long time. But I did spend 5 years going around the country, looking at VAs all over. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco because I live in the Bay Area, but I've been to Memphis and Boston and San Antonio and Milwaukee and Portland and San Diego and San Antonio. Did I say San Antonio? I don't know. And veterans were amazing because they literally let me come into their world, into their exam rooms. I didn't just interview VA caregivers and ask them, do you give good care? And they would say yes, and then I would say, I don't do it that way. And I observed care. I sat in on mental health sessions. I learned mindfulness meditation training with a bunch of vets with PTSD. I did PT sessions. I hung out with Iraq and Afghanistan vets who were in a cognitive rehab program at PTSD and traumatic brain injury in Martinez, California. I spent several weeks with them. I followed a palliative care team for 3 weeks. I saw the care. Now, I didn't see it everywhere. And I really want to applaud the people who work in the VHA because you are getting really bashed in a completely unfair way by Congress and the media. And you take care of the oldest, sickest, poorest, and sometimes most difficult patients in this country. I mean, the VA cherry picks the oldest, sickest, poorest patients. There's no healthcare system that says if you're healthy and wealthy, you can't come. You know? And the VHA, you can't, I mean, except for the people from Iraq and Afghanistan, the post 9/11 vets who now get 5 years care, no questions asked, and some Vietnam, I mean, there's some categories, there's 8 priorities. I always try to remember them and memorize them. I can never memorize them all. But basically, Congress, in its infinite unwisdom, has said that we're not going to cover all vets. A lot of people, and I think I might have been one of them, I mean, I didn't give much thought, think that all veterans are covered. And 20 million veterans we have now are not all covered. You have to either have a service-connected disability and or low income. Both. And otherwise you can't get in. Or a catastrophic injury. And I'm going to tell you about that because that's why anybody who's a vet who doesn't think they need the VA should enroll immediately if they can. And I have gotten some friends of mine to enroll because they, oh, I don't need the VA, I have, you know, private insurance, blah, blah. And I'm like, let me tell you a couple of stories. But we don't cover all vets. And yet the VHA takes care of the oldest, sickest, poorest, and therefore sickest. I mean, you're old, sick, and you're poor, and that means you're sicker, right? I mean, obviously not all vets are old, but the average age of the 9 million vets who are enrolled in VA care is 62. And vets have, this is another thing I discovered, and this is really important to the privatization issue, because one of the things, and it's also very important to those of us fighting for national health care, Medicare, or whatever, is to understand that the VHA is not only a healthcare system, and I mean healthcare system as opposed to medical system, it's different. It's also a public health system. It deals with what we call social determinants of health, housing, vocation, employment, economic problems, homelessness, etc., which I described in my book. And it's really important to understand that veterans, and this I really discovered, I mean, I certainly didn't know when I went in. I mean, I kind of knew, you know, PTSD, Agent Orange, you know, burn bits, okay, I read the paper. But I didn't understand the specificity of veterans' healthcare problems. I mean, they have more chronic pain than the average population of patients. Because guess what? Carrying 70, 100-pound packs on your back, and, you know, it is like not so great for your bones. They have more mental health problems. They have higher suicide rates, a risk of suicide. They have more substance abuse problems. They have more civilian adjustment problems. Because if you go into the military when you're 18 and you're taught how to kill people and you're taught to think black and white and everything is done for you, right? You kind of have trouble maybe leaving after 2 years, 4 years, 20 years, whatever. I also discovered that, you know, they have a lot of problems with opioids. Why? Why? Who did it to them? Why? Because the DOT gave opiates out like candy. You know, right? You know, like football players, get out there on the field. They have, I think, significant problems asking for help and asking for care. I mean, it's so extraordinary, and people in this room know about this probably, but I sat with a Korean War veteran in Honolulu who was 85 years old and had just gone to get help with PTSD 5 years earlier. He had lived with PTSD for, how many years? 50? I mean, it was extraordinary. He thought it was just because he was Portuguese. You know, he'd lost his wife, his family. He couldn't go to a barbecue because he couldn't stand the smell of flesh. He had been having nightmares for 50, 60 years. And he went to the VA. He may be dead now. I don't know if this was 5 years ago. But finally he had some peace, right? And I South Vietnam vets in Milwaukee, 6 of them, who had put up with this stuff for 40, how many years since, the 60s. Put up with this, and then they retired, and it all came back to them, and they were sitting in this room. It was just incredible. And that's why I put hope in here, health, healing, and hope. Because it wasn't just that it sounded good, but these people did get hope, right? From the VA. I mean, women with military sexual trauma, who I sat with a group who were doing yoga at the Sacramento VA, of 10 women aged 31 to 65, and they talked to me about, their struggles and what it meant to them to come to a place where they could be with each other, where people understood them, and how private sector doctors just didn't get it. Ken, you'll like this. Ken Engelhardt is a retired VA doctor. And we're going to help hear from him. But recently I was talking with a friend who's a Vietnam vet, and he had come back from Vietnam with PTSD, and he finally went to the VA to get help. And he told me he got the help, and he then was fine. He worked in the private sector. He had his own African-American newspaper in Richmond. And he was fine, and he was going to, he had good insurance. And then he retired. And he had a lot of time on his hands. And it's started having nightmares and insomnia. And he goes to his primary care doc. I'm sure he was a very nice man. And he tells me he's had nightmares and insomnia, and he prescribes Ambien. And that's actually not going to work. And he didn't even know he was a vet, because most private sector doctors and nurses, practitioners that don't ask their PTs, or anybody, don't ask that question. I mean, I'm 73. I could have been a nurse in Vietnam. I could have been a nurse in the Army. I could have been, my husband has never been asked if he was in the military, and why? They don't ask that question, right? So they can't put it together. So in writing this book, what I try to describe in this book is what the VA care looks like. And I look at primary care, I look at integrated mental health in primary care, I look at geriatrics, I look at rehabilitation, because the VA also focuses on function, right? On restoring people to function. It was sort of like this huge epiphany I had when I was in a blind rehab facility too, actually. One in West Haven, Connecticut, and another in Menlo Park in California, and also in the polytrauma system of care, where they care for people with strokes and amputations and PTSD, and traumatic brain injury, etc. And another thing that a lot of people, this was very interesting to me, which I don't think people know about, and I certainly don't think the folks in Washington who want to privatize the VA get, but we have facilities in the VA don't just take care of veterans, they take care of active duty personnel, military personnel. Because Army, Navy, military hospitals don't do rehab. So they have an MOA, a memorandum of MOU, whatever, of understanding with the VA. So you privatize the VA, it's going to be real interesting to see what happens to these active duty guys, and women, who a lot of them get into motor vehicle accidents when they're young. And then, there's things that are going on in the VA that are just amazing. So I want to just tell you two more things, and then maybe read something and then open it up. The thing that this book tries to show, and the whole point of this book is, what integrated care means and what it means to have a community of care. Because I think the VA and Ken and what are your names?
Lynn, Wendy.
Wendy. Sam?
Lynn.
Lynn and Wendy can maybe talk about this. I think at the VA at its best creates a community of care. And what I mean by that is not just a community for veterans, but for the people who take care of the veterans. Because they know each other. They do teamwork together. I've been writing about end-of-life care for almost 30 years. And in America, end-of-life care for those of us who aren't veterans is a pretty sorry thing. You know, most of us want to die at home, but we die in hospitals. We might go to hospice, 2 days before we die, which doesn't really help. It bankrupts hospice. And now hospice is being taken over by for-profits. And the VA, and one of the reasons why we don't have good palliative and hospice care is because the decision to transfer a patient to palliative hospice care for a physician, or even a nurse practitioner maybe, is not revenue neutral. You can't bill anymore, right? You're not going to be paid for extra futile chemotherapy, right? It's not a revenue neutral decision. And the VA, VHA, they're all on salary. They have no incentive to overtreat. They have no incentive to duplicate tests. They have no incentive to keep you in the hospital, more and more and more. They have an incentive to do patient safety. Because if it's safe, you're not going to stay longer, right? And they aren't going to make more money. They can give the best drugs because they negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry, which is why they want privatization. And it's an amazing system. Now it has problems. But I've never, in my 35 years of researching healthcare, seen as many mission-driven people working for patients as I have at the VA. And they're people who make sacrifices to work there because they're not allowed, this is really a brilliant idea that Congress had, they're not allowed to offer market rate salaries. And more to the point, they are never allowed to beat the market. Now, I think that's very deliberate because I think if they were allowed to beat the market, people would want to work there. I mean, why would you want to work for, Mother May I insurance companies, right? Or for-profits. And so basically, they make these sacrifices. And they also deal with some, not all, clearly, very difficult patients, some of whom are dangerous, a small number of whom are dangerous to themselves and others. And I think that one of the things I realized, and they also deal with people that the private sector doesn't want to touch, homeless veterans. I mean, what are the big hospitals in Minneapolis? I don't, in St. Paul, I don't know.
Region County.
Pardon?
Region County Medical Center.
I mean, do these hospitals want homeless veterans? Do they want people who are, throwing chairs and cursing sometimes? Do they want people who are with chronic, mental illness? Do they want people with chronic pain, that it's very tough to manage? I don't think so. And so I have become a big fan of this community of care because what I describe in my book is people who help patients and help each other help patients, which is extremely important. And I also try to describe for people who never experienced it, because those of us who aren't in the VA haven't experienced this integrated care. I mean, we don't have integrated care in America. We have, you know, figure it out for yourself care. We have caregivers, doctors, nurses, PTs, OTs, but we never talk to each other. We'll communicate through notes and charts. You know, that's not integration. Sadly, Congress thinks that's integration. That's not integration. It's Ken walking the patient down the hall and giving a warm handoff to a mental health provider who's right around, who has office in that practice, or the dietitian, or the pharmacist, or the social worker. I mean, we don't experience that, right? We don't experience one-stop shopping. I have a friend who's a veteran, and I describe people in this book, who's an Iraq vet, 30 years old, was told he has the body of a 69-year-old. He has 16 different problems. 16 different problems. Mental, physical. He told me if I had to go all over San Francisco to different doctors, I'd be in a ditch. So it's an extraordinary system. And I think those of us who aren't veterans need to learn about this system because this is what we should all have. It shouldn't be veterans-only system. And I think, and I'd love to talk about this in the question period because I think that those of us who are fighting for Medicare for all or whatever we're fighting for national health care, we have to be very careful about the VA. Because if you don't say that you want the VA to be part of, not apart from the system, veterans will be opposed to you, and they'll be opposed to you anyway because a lot of them are represented by conservative groups like the Legion and the VFW and stuff like that. But it's very important that people understand that as long as we're in imperial power, which I wish we weren't, and as long as we have this huge army, and as long as we're involved with these conflicts, and even if tomorrow we stopped being involved in these conflicts, we got a lot of people who've been damaged by them, we need a system that specializes in their special problems. And that's something I would have never said 5 years ago. I mean, I didn't know. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, I want to read you something from the book that illustrates, for me, the community of care and the safe haven that veterans have in the VA, and that is jeopardized, and we can talk about it in the question period, by the Mission Act, by the VA Accountability Act, and by efforts to privatize the VA. It's a chilly day in late August 2015 at the facility known as Fort Myer, a medical center in San Francisco operated by the Veterans Health Administration. While researching this book, I've spent many hours at Fort Myer. I originally came to explore how the VHA, a publicly funded national healthcare system, more European in form than our fragmented, market-driven private sector model, serves its patients. I looked at, sorry, I'm trying to condense this. On this particular day, I am going to a mindfulness meditation session, and I stop off for coffee in the Fort Myer canteen after spending the morning observing the work of VHA telehealth specialists who assist veterans in rural California unable to make the trip to San Francisco. I'm sitting, it's close to noon, and the cafeteria begins to fill up with veterans, their family members, and VHA employees. A stocky man in his 40s looking for an empty table and finding none stops by mine. He points to a vacant seat and asks, "Do you mind if I sit down?" "Please do," I respond. As he sits down, I glance at his lunch. "No, I'm not sharing that with you," he jokes. As we chat, I tell him that I'm writing a book about veterans' health care. He quickly introduces himself and launches into an unsolicited testimonial to the VHA. His name is Rick Martinez, and he tells me a story that will become very familiar as I conduct hundreds of conversations and formal interviews with veterans like him. Martinez spent 20 years in the Marines. After he retired, he developed mental health problems and was eventually diagnosed with manic depression. Like so many men and women whose stories are told in this book, Martinez initially avoided seeking treatment, a reflex finally honed while on active duty. In the Marine Corps, he explained, they discourage you from going to the medic or doctor. It's hard for us to get help because the majority of us don't want to be wimpy. I went to war, I don't need help, is the attitude. If I tell people I'm having trouble, I'll be processed out. In civilian life, Martinez could no longer hang on to my brothers and charge on, he says. He began to drink a lot, didn't want to get out of bed, and experienced paranoid episodes. He now gets professional help at the VHA's downtown San Francisco clinic and also sees a psychiatrist at Fort Miley who prescribes and checks on his various medications. At City College of San Francisco, where he's studying sociology and film, Martinez regularly visits the Veterans Resource Center, where a social worker named Keith Armstrong has been really helpful, he says. Talking with these staff members about his personal problems is still not easy to him, but he does it. He urges me to contact Armstrong at the Veterans Resource Center, where he and others have been able to find camaraderie and community on campus, thanks to the VA. As Martinez gets up to leave, a veteran at the next table leans over and tells me he's been listening to our conversation and would like to talk to me as well. Older than Martinez, 59-year-old Philip Davis has a craggy face and trim beard and short gray hair. He served for 22 years in the Marines, most of the time as a platoon sergeant, a role in which he was a tough taskmaster. A lot of people didn't like me, he says. During the first Gulf War, his unit was scheduled for deployment, but did not end up seeing combat. Like Martinez, Davis found transitioning to civilian life a hard adjustment. In the military, he says, things run smoothly. People do as they're told. If they don't, there are consequences. There are no consequences for civilians, he believes. Later in his career, Davis suffered a non-combat injury to his back. That condition, plus PTSD, led him to Fort Miley. He confesses to having anger management issues. Medical center security was once called when he snapped and shouted at a young VHA doc during a routine appointment. Despite this incident, he is grateful for VHA assistance. Thank you, David. Thank you. He is grateful for VHA assistance with his physical and mental health problems. His wife also feels strongly supported by the VHA, he says. Well, I'm still chatting with Davis, a third veteran, who has overheard our conversation, walks by and hands me a paper napkin with his phone number written on it and a scribbled note asking me to call him later. When I do, I learn that he, like 100,000 other VA employees, is a veteran himself. He just wants me to know that he would have found it very difficult to get employment outside the VHA and is grateful for being able to serve his fellow veterans. So I'm reading that because it's almost impossible to imagine that happening in a regular hospital. We've all sat in them waiting rooms and cafeterias, I certainly have, and people never talk to each other. These veterans, I mean, I never started a conversation by asking a veteran about mental health problems. Oh, hi, how are you? Tell me about your, bipolar disorder. No, never. And this guy starts telling me about his bipolar disorder. This other guy overhears and starts telling me about his anger management issues, PTSD, and then this other guy walks by. I mean, I was like stunned, And that, to me, illustrates, this is a safe place for these people. And you're, in it, and you're okay. It's stunning. It's a stunning story. And I'm a nonfiction writer, could not make this stuff up. And that's what they're trying to take away from veterans and from all of us. Because they're trying to kill VHA research. The VHA is one of the biggest research powerhouses in the country. They developed the Hep C med. They developed the shingles vaccine. They developed the nicotine patch. On and on and on and on. They teach 70% of American physicians in training, PTs, OTs, nurses, etc. The medical system will collapse, the medical education, the healthcare education. And the other thing they do is emergency preparedness. So I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but like in California fires this year and last year, I sat with people in the command center in Fort Miley, and they were calling veterans in Santa Rosa and Napa. This was last year, and they were doing it this year, to find out if they had their meds, if they had shelter, if they had care. Every single patient. Same thing happened when I was in Honolulu, and there was a volcano exploding on the Big Island. I don't think anybody got a call from Sutter or UCSF, or, you know what I mean, like these private hospitals. How are you doing? Can we help you? The VA hospital in Puerto Rico was the only functioning hospital that served that entire island after the hurricane, because they had special emergency generators. And now we're fighting VA privatization, Veterans for Peace. I gave you a card, Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute. I hope you'll all check it out. I'm a senior policy analyst, fellow, whatever there. And we need everybody in this room, whether you're a veteran or not, to understand that the VA Mission Act's mission is to kill the VA. And they are outsourcing more and more care. Secretary Wilkie says that they're opposed to privatization, that he's not privatizing, but he's defining privatization as we're going to sell off everything to developers tomorrow and close the system down. That's one definition. But what they're doing to the VA is like what they're doing to public schools. It's the salami strategy, death by 1,000 cuts. And right now, they're developing eligibility standards under the Mission Act. The Mission Act was passed with, I understand, votes from your two senators. Tim Walz opposed it, and Ellison opposed it, but sadly, the overwhelming number of Democrats voted for it. The VSOs, the Veteran Service Organizations, supported it. They bad bargain with the devil and are now having buyer's remorse. And this is going to open the floodgates for private sector care. In the name of choice, it's going to eliminate the VA as a choice. It's going to starve the VA of resources because every dollar for private sector care will come out of the VA budget. They're already starting to eliminate programs and services. And I'm warning you that if you read the fine print in some VA releases, they want to limit services to what they call foundational services. Rehab, mental health care, PTSD, geriatric care, and life care, all of the stuff the private sector does not want to do, because they don't want to do chronic management. They want the hip replacements and the knee replacements and the colonoscopies and the PT, they want the stuff they can fee-for-service bill for. And I would ask all of you to get one of these stickers and put it on your car or your computer. Can you?
Take one.
No, but you saw one, right, recently?
I did what?
Didn't you send me a picture of one that you just...
Yes, at the
Yeah.
parking lot of the Minnesota Zoo, actually.
Yeah, we have them back there. I have two on my car, and I'm not a veteran. I have one of these, and I have an I Love My VA on my car. And I have one on my computer, and they start conversations, people look on my computer and, oh my God, the VA, isn't that so awful? I had a journalist who I was talking to recently say, I wrote a book on the VA. He asked me when he saw this, and I said, he said, oh, was it an expose? And I said, yeah, I'm exposing what a great system it is. And so the other thing is to call your congresspeople and your senators. And if you're a veteran, say, we want the VA to be our first choice, and so fully fund and staff it. If you're not a veteran, you can say, you know, this is an important model of care, what are you doing? And the other thing is, you can write, and I think Veterans for Peace should do this, you can write and demand a hearing from the House or Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and you can write and demand a hearing from the Subcommittee on Appropriations on some of this stuff. So it's not just, you can, you know, you can write to your members, you can write Congress, you know, we want a hearing on staffing, we want a hearing on eligibility standards, so. So I want to stop talking, I'm talking way too long, I'm glad my husband is here, because he would be yelling at me. And I'd like to open it up for questions and
Yes.
for comments, and yes.
This isn't to assume that the progressive people that we voted on in are, you know, that we need to sit back on our laurels, but do you think that the progressive people that we voted on in are going to be a big help as far as, you know, supporting what, you know, supporting the VA? What do you mean this maybe?
I'm so glad you asked that question. No, I think you have to educate them.
Yes, exactly.
First of all, they're not all progressive.
Right.
And second of all, if you look at even like AFG and NNU and these other groups that supported some of these, a lot of what they were saying was pretty much straight out of the Koch brothers book. Accountability.
I'm not talking about the Koch brothers.
No, but
I'm talking about the progressive people that took over the House.
And yes, and the thing is that, but the point is that the Democrats, and even a lot of progressive Democrats, have bought the conservative, ultra-right narrative that the VA is broken. And so we have to educate them, I believe. I mean, one of the things that I'm asking unions and folks to do is to give people this book. You know, okay, the people, you know, the senator or Congress people may not read it, but their staff will. And one of the things that it's very important to understand about congressional and Senate staff is that, okay, so the Congress people and senators have people who are assigned to health care, and they have MLAs, they have military legislative, you know, staff, who are assigned to foreign policy, the military, and the VA. And the MLAs don't know anything about health care. They're mostly, as some congressional friend of mine told me, which will remain nameless, 27-year-old guys who like guns. And the healthcare people don't know anything about the VA. So it's extremely important to educate these people because they don't know anything about the system. And I think it's a super mistake to think that these new people in the House, whether they're progressive Democrats or not, get it. Yes. I'll come back to you, but okay, so I'm going to make I'm sorry, I should set a little ground rules here. So I'm going to go from people to people, person to person, and then we can come back so that everybody can ask a question. And I'd appreciate it if you'd kind of limit your remarks so that everybody can make remarks and contribute.
Can you
Yes.
repeat the question, then?
What was
When they
When
say
they
it,
give it?
when they give it.
Oh,
Because I
absolutely.
can't hear it.
Oh, sure, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Well, to amplify what you just said, we've recently learned that the DCCC deliberately recruited candidates who were not necessarily committed to a national health plan or
Oh,
a
sure.
state-based health plan. And they've taken a lot of money from causes, you know, the medical industrial complex. So many of these new House members are not necessarily, they're kind of proudly moderate, which means
Right.
needing a lot of pushing from us as constituents. And then the other thing about the VA's, the so-called scandal, we have to get good at refuting that kind of stuff by a little critical thinking. And I will credit MSNBC when that Phoenix thing, you know, really heated up during the Obama era. They looked into, and I'll see if you can tell me if this is right. They said Congress increased eligibility for certain conditions like PTSD and Agent Orange, but did not increase resources. So eligibility went up 50% or something like that. Resources maybe 9 or 10%. So of course you're going to have a mismatch between resources and requirements, and the more we learn, the better we are at.
So, oh boy, you didn't hear anything.
It's a lot of words.
Essentially, if I could summarize, what was your name?
It's Ann.
Ann Jones, yes, sorry. Ann was just commenting that, and I'm going to summarize because I can't repeat it all, that a lot of people who are new to the House are not for any kind of single-payer system or national health care system. They're indebted to the traditional lobbyists, and that one of the things that's going on is that they've increased the demands on the VA without increasing funding. So yes, Agent Orange, and they've given, this is a big thing that Trump has done. He for example, he expanded, he's given 1 year free mental health care to transitioning veterans, transitioning people who are leaving the military, and it's a huge burden on VA staff, and there's no funding for it. There's just thing after thing after thing where there's no funding. And so that's another way that you kill the system. Yes.
Hi, is it the Mission Act that you wanted senators to vote against,
Well, they voted for it.
and that's back?
Yes, okay, so if you go to veteranspolicy.org, it's on this VHPI, we have an analysis of the Mission Act, and then I've done a lot of writing. If you go to my website, which is SuzanneGordon.com, you can find a lot of analysis, and then of course there's the book. And one of the things that's, I think, important for folks to know is this book has a whole chapter on comparing the VA to the private sector, because that is never, the media never says compared to what, and Congress never says compared to what, and that's extremely important. The Mission Act has several components, some of which are good. I mean, there was an expansion of a program called the Caregiver Support Program, which was a program that was developed for post-9/11 vets who are severely disabled, and a family member or friend can be paid to care for them in the home and get health insurance and training. And the VSOs wanted it to be expanded to all vets. And rather than have a standalone bill, which is what should have happened with its own funding, they put it in the Mission Act, and they bought off the veteran service organizations, and they made a big mistake. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how the veteran service organizations, knowing what Trump is like, really sold veterans down the river to be players in DC and to get caregiver support, knowing that there was going to be no funding for the Mission Act, and knowing all the unintended consequences that could happen. And I think they made a tragic mistake that they're now regretting. And I think it can be stopped, maybe, if enough people go to Congress and the Senate and complain. But you gotta make those phone calls, you know? And the unions have to tell stories, and the VA caregivers have to, you know, a lot of VA caregivers are afraid of the Hatch Act, and they don't get it.
Well, I've worked in both the private and public sector, and I've thought the VA was vastly superior for all the reasons that you just talked about. And I really was putting my hope in the veterans themselves. Healing really starts in the waiting rooms because the military experience is so unique. And you know, like people who are in the Korean War and Vietnam War, and they start talking, and right there's a communication that I think is healing. So my question is, I always thought that the veterans themselves would be the ones that save the VA, because look at the private sector and go, oh my God, what is this? But now I can feel the deterioration of the quality coming down, like wanting us to fail when you're not funded or something like that. So which do you think will have greater traction in being positive? The veteran experience where they say, no, we want the VA? Or do you think that it will be eroded so quickly that they'll kind of buy into the whole privatization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. She's asking whether the veterans can sort of save the VA or they'll be eroded, and then they'll want to go into the private sector. That's the intention. The intention is to erode the care, like with the public schools, and then set up these kind of versions of charter schools. So I think we all have to do it. I don't think we can depend only on veterans. First of all, a lot of the veterans who need the VA the most are hanging on by their fingernails and are not going to be able to do this. You know, I mean, that's the almost criminal nature of this enterprise, is that they're taking a system away from veterans who are really unable to fight for themselves, some of them. So those veterans who can't fight for themselves, like people in Sworn Veterans for Peace, must do that, and they are doing it. And I applaud them. But I think VA employees, I mean, there's 300,000 of you. And, you know, you gotta get the Hatch Act straight, you know, and not listen to your managers, because you can call your Congress people, and you can get your friends. And I mean, everybody in this room knows 10 people, 10 at a minimum, who can make those 3 phone calls, which take exactly 5 minutes to make, including looking up, you know, the phone number or the email. And then everybody in this room who isn't a veteran, you know? So you and you, she was...
So I spent 25 years nursing, mostly in the private sector, and but also county, and had several people that I know, one very, you know, day after day at the VA, just unbelievably impressed. You know, that exactly what you're talking about, that community of care, and so, you know, I think I was, you know, definitely trained. It was kind of like, oh, the VA, you know. I mean, it's like, it's just one of those, people are trained to take pot shots at the VA, you know, and in terms of like what's happening is, it like you said, I mean, the fact that as a group, you know, we equate guns. You know, you can't have a vet without a gun, right? I mean, that's kind of basic. And so, you know, the gun people, well, I mean, it's not entirely true, but, you know, it's war, right? I mean, the American war machine. And so guns equals Republicans, you know, and so then they vote Republican. You know, it's like, it's super easy, you know, linguistically for the Republicans to capture that image and get them to vote against their own best interests, right? So this is where, you know, and again, it's like, you know, I'm not a vet. You know, so to have a conversation, you know, I spent a lot of time campaigning this year, and like have conversations with people, for me primarily around single payer. Some people are like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Like, what was the one thing that everyone in this room put up their hands? National health. But at the same time, the first thing is like fear. You know, fear that somehow like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. That's one sort of school of thought, you know, in terms of why we haven't gone to single payer. The other school of thought is the classic divorce. You know, I think I can do better than you. You know, right? It's like, I'm gonna divorce you because I can do better than, you know, better than. So these are sort of the two competing things that I see. And of course, you know, the power people are really good at manipulating that. But I do believe that, you know, we have many, many instances in today's world where when people rally around an issue, it does not go the way the Koch brothers or the power brokers or the lobbyists or the big money corporations want. So that's what, you know, gives me hope.
Yeah. I would, you and then Ken. Oh, and then, is that right? Sorry.
Okay, first of all, I really appreciate your connection and with single payer, because I think that is really what's at stake. And I like the question that you brought up about the critical care, you know, and that can really steamroll. My question is I'm with Veterans for Peace, and I coordinate the newsletter, and the publicity out there is good to get those calls in. What would you suggest succinctly, and I'm thinking especially like an Amy Klobuchar, who has great outreach, what would you suggest the primary thing being if we call up Amy Klobuchar's office, if she is to get thousands of phone calls?
Okay, so I think you should first say, I'm a veteran, if you're a veteran, I'll give you the veteran one. And I am really concerned about the development of eligibility standards for Mission Act that the Secretary is doing right now. I want you to have a hearing on, because I want the VA to be my first choice, and I want you to fund and staff the VA. So, and I want the eligibility standards to be based on clinical issues, not drive times or wait times. Right now, they're considering drive times of 30 minutes to a mental health and primary care appointment and 60 minutes to a specialty appointment. So that's essentially everybody, because nobody has to, I mean, it's 30 to 60 minutes, you know? And they're considering, okay, the other thing is, there's three things, the wait times of 14, 20, 14, and 7 will go down to 7 days. If you have to wait for more than 7 days, I mean more than 14, 20, 14, and 7 in this year. That's everybody, because people have to wait. They're not requiring private sector docs to have, or providers to have the same training, rigorous training as VA docs, because they said that they won't participate in the program, so they have to have the same training. So it's like, what are the eligibility standards? Why aren't you developing eligibility standards based on clinical need? Why aren't you making private sector providers have the same rigorous training as VA providers? And why aren't you assessing quality and wait times in the private sector before you refer people out to it? Those 4 things would be enough. And I want you to have a hearing or demand a member's briefing on this, right? And so that's, I mean, we're going to develop for veterans healthcare policy. You know, I'm not sure we can do that because I can let people know, and you could, maybe I'll put it on my website, but what people should be asking and saying. And it's the same thing if you're not a vet. And also, you know, if you're the wife or daughter or child of a vet, right? Or friend of a vet. Because it kind of impacts you, right? If you're the cousin or niece or whatever. I mean, I have a friend whose brother was a Vietnam vet and who, you know, has had PTSD for a bazillion years and who would have been homeless if it weren't for the VA. And she said to me, our lives would have been ruined as a family because we would have had to manage a chronically ill homeless veteran for the past 40 years. You know, I mean, it's not just, people who are veterans, right? Ken, do you want to?
Well, first, Suzanne, I want to thank you for writing this book and drawing attention to this issue. I can tell that you've done your homework. You've been in the VA system just on what you've said. So one thing I'd like to say is I think the most staunch and fierce defenders of the VA are veterans themselves. My first experience with the VA was interviewing up at Twin Ports, and this was 2005, and I went up there for the interview, and before I even started the interview process, someone in the clinic came up to me and said, well, they almost closed this clinic last year, but the veterans rose up and kept it going. And so they almost shut that clinic down, and the veterans were the ones that stepped up and said, we want to keep this clinic here in Twin Ports in Superior, Wisconsin. That influenced my decision to go there. Said they're almost going to close this clinic down. I don't know if I want to practice there. And I was fortunate enough to get into the Minneapolis VA system here. I also want to say that I think it's unfortunate and it's a disservice to the veterans to think that the private sector is fragmented and inefficient as it is. It makes all the rest of us want to have a single payer system. To send the veterans out into that jungle, you know, I think it's a disservice to veterans. The private sector is not equipped to handle the unique needs that veterans have. And if the U.S. government really cared enough to fund the Veterans Administration adequately, then we wouldn't have these issues. They starved the VA. One of the frustrations I had as clinical co-chief and involved in hiring primary care providers was I could not hire people because the funds weren't there. I couldn't hire doctors to take care of patients because the funds weren't there. So then they don't provide the money and they turn around and say, well, you can't get patients in on time. Well, if you would give me the doctors I need, we would get the patients in on time. You know, so it's a revolving door, and they set us up for failure by not funding it adequately. And just one last thing is the VA in head-to-head studies of the private sector does just as well or better. And there's an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association, I think it was April of 2017, where they compared 30-day death rates and readmission to the hospital for 4 conditions, you know, COPD, heart attacks, pneumonia, and I won't go on, but CHF, and so the VA did as well or better than private hospitals.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had veterans tell me, I've been to Mayo and I've been here at the Minneapolis VA, I can't tell the difference.
So we gotta get those stories out. I mean, we gotta get those stories out. You have to go, I mean, I don't know, Randy, if you feel comfortable, but, you know, the media has to start writing about these stories. And the VSO should be going to these television stations and newspapers like USA Today. I mean, it is absolutely appalling. USA Today and the Boston Globe did a spotlight, you know, spotlight, the pedophile priest. They've taken on the VA, they're the new pedophile priest, you know. And they did a spotlight piece on the Manchester VA. They killed this guy's career. And the OIG and the inspector and another, I guess GAO, just did 2 reports that refuted everything in the Spotlight team's report. But is the Boston Globe apologizing? I mean, it is unbelievable, you know. And so, please.
No,
Why don't you take this because
first of all, I do want to give credit to the local media. They have done a couple of great articles for us here locally.
And Randy first.
Just a comment, you know, I talk to a lot of veterans. I talk to people working at the VA, and you know, people at veteran service are, and most people are denial about it. They think, you know, it ain't gonna happen. You know, it's not gonna happen. There's no way.
Right.
Well, that's, you know, when they're walking out the door, there's no way. I mean, you know, people are in denial about it, as far as I can tell.
Wait, do you want to?
Sure.
And people should maybe identify themselves if they feel comfortable.
Well, my name is Jim Carlson, and I'm a state senator here in Minnesota. I would like, because you've done so much research, I'd like you to clarify something for me. Because of my position, I get invited to do a lot of interesting things, and one of them was to kick off the Salvation Army bell ringing one year. And my co-bell ringer was a veteran who had been in Iraq he had legs full of shrapnel. And he was from Wisconsin. And he told me how terrible the VA was at Toma, Wisconsin. And finally, they told him, move to Minneapolis, we'll give the better care. We've heard many times that Minneapolis is not only the best VA hospital, but it's the best hospital around. So he came up here and he said, it's dramatically different. And I looked into that a little bit, and Toma, Wisconsin is a contract. And what I hear is that even Hibbing is a contract. You know, and people that are familiar with it can probably clarify that. Did
It's
you
probably
find?
gonna get finished up, the contract, I think it's gonna wind down.
Oh, because did you find a difference between those that are actual VA-run clinics and hospitals and those that are contract? Because the difference
Yeah.
that this fellow told me was dramatic. It
Yeah.
was amazing.
So, I don't know about that actually, and I should. But I think there are VAs that have problems that others don't. There's 1,700 sites of care. But that would be true of any large hospital system, so we have to be kind of careful with that. There's also, I think you have to respect what veterans say, but you also have to look at not just what one veteran says. And I think you also have to be very careful of what the media is reporting. For example, Dave Phillips at the New York Times did a big front page story on a VA in Roseburg, Oregon. And this is a critical access hospital. You know what that, right? Very tiny hospital. And they had decided that they didn't have enough patient volume to have surgery and intensive care, because as Ken and other, in order to be safe as a facility, you have to have enough patient volume to keep up skills. So they closed surgery and intensive care. So they were sending veterans out into the community, and they had some actual contract doctors come in and they objected to this, and they said, well, there are a lot of beds that are empty, and Phillips kind of just took that at face value, and our nursing friend here can explain. You can have as many beds as you want in a hospital. If they're not staffed and supported, you don't want patients in them. It's not a question of beds, it's staffed beds, but Phillips doesn't know anything about healthcare. He also accused the VA, and again, what the pattern is with the Koch brothers Congress and sometimes the media, they take one VA that's having problems, like, I don't know, Toma was one with some doctor prescribing opioids, right? And they blow that up and make it stand for the whole system. And they take problems that exist in the private sector and blow it up. And so he accused the VA totally of trying to send complex patients out to the private sector in order to avoid getting dinged in their sale ratings. I'd be glad to talk to you about this, afterwards. But he, sort of extraordinary, doesn't seem to know you can't do that because they get dinged anyway. In other words, if you have a vet come in to an ER and he's sent to a private sector hospital and he dies within 30 days, that death gets blamed on the VA. You cannot do that. But he didn't know that. The same thing happened with the recent nursing home reports. So it's very complex. The sale ratings are complex. We've all read these stories about, so you can be a VA facility, it's 1 to 5, and you can be a 1, but you can still be very good. because it's a bell curve. And so the VA happens to be a very good system that beats the private sector on a lot of measures. So if you're a 1, that doesn't mean you're the worst. I mean, and so my analogy is, you can be the worst player on the Golden State Warriors and still be
You're still really good.
one of the best basketball players in America. And these reporters, I mean, I talk to them all the time, they don't even know what a bell curve is. So I don't know, Dr. O'Neill, but all I have to say is, if you have a VHA facility that is actually not doing well, the solution is not to start with resources and close it. The solution is to fix it. And that's not what they're doing. And let me just say to you as a state senator, and I'm so glad you're here, and I am actually going to give you a present. But we have a healthcare system in our country, broader healthcare system, that is really stressed. We don't have enough primary care doctors. 55% of American counties all over the world have no psychologist, psychiatrist, or social worker. Veterans in rural areas do not live near specialty care, VA or not. And I think it's going to be a very nasty picture when you turn 9 million veterans out into the private sector, competing with me and the folks in this room who aren't vets. And if America has not done well by vets, and if they start competing with us, I'm telling you, they're not going to fare well. You know, I mean, my husband recently called up a PT in San Francisco and was told that he had a bad knee and he was hurting. He was told he'd have to wait a month for an appointment. And then they asked him about his insurance, and he told them he had Medicare, and they said, oh, whoops, that'll be 2 months. Because we're saving our, you know. Well, if they're going to put the vets ahead of him and me, I mean, that's not good. And that's what's going to happen. So I think legislators like yourself, mayors and state legislators, boy, I mean, I don't know how many vets there are in Minnesota, but, you know, it's not going to be pretty.
No, you said,
Wow, okay.
yeah, could you just clarify again, because I don't want to walk out of here thinking that you are advocating a separation between the single payer and the veterans. What I'm hearing you say is like, it's either part of a single payer campaign or it's separate from it. I'm not sure
Right.
what
Oh,
you're saying.
I'm so glad you asked that, thank you. No, what I'm saying is that if we had a national health system of some sort, right, the VA would be part of that, but I would not advocate. There are some people, and I just was at a PNHP meeting where Ken and I were supposed to present, but he couldn't come because he had a medical problem, so I had to do it all by myself.
I'm sorry.
And one young doc, a resident, he was a medical student or what, in the room said, well, if we have a single payer system, we can get rid of the VA. And I said, because any doctor can take care of a veteran. And I said, the VA should be, a part of that system. And veterans could go there or not, and there would be no eligibility requirements because you'd have a national health system. But you wouldn't get rid of the VA. Is that good?
Are they two separate campaigns right now between advocating for single payer and advocating for the VA? That's what I'm not clear on.
Okay, HR 676 and the Bernie Sanders bill, that is up for review because things will be looked at how to do it. And many of us propose exactly what she said. The VA, I'm a retired VA hospital nurse, and so then I will tell you that their needs are very unique. We need to keep that intact
because of the support that they can get. And you are trained when you go into that system of all the different branches of services, all their needs, if they have any problems with mental health, it's all integrated, like she said. It needs to stay that way. There is no way we can help the injured and the people after their war and their service in that same unique way. So then it would be like setting up policies, rules that the VA, the socialized system, it's socialized because the hospitals and the clinics and everything are owned by the government and it's paid by the government. Whereas a national health plan, it would be a payer plan paid to any network you choose.
Okay.
So then there would have to be something set up, just like we have a Department of Defense that is set up differently. And the other one that would be unique is Native American health. That would have to be considered too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody?
Yeah, I've got a question that, the veterans in politics is really a particular mess. It's really hard to understand and all this. The veterans are conflicted themselves. They don't advocate for themselves very well, all this sort of thing. And part of it comes right out of the experience of veterans, which is, Marines got it down to 9 words. We break you down and we build you up. So there's a submission thing. The veterans have been seriously hard. And then they come back through and they really don't achieve a very good sense of agency. And they're not advocating on their own behalf very well, and there's just serious ambivalence going on. So that's why this may be an explanation of why it's frustrating to have vets advocate on their own behalf, because they're not really clear about what's going on, and there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. So it is frustrating. I've been active with advocating at a political level for veterans. And, the big service organizations are, as from their beginning, they were funded by industry and all that. So they've really captured a lot of that energy, the political energy. So it is truly a struggle, and it's an ongoing struggle. So we live with that, and we get someplace sometimes, but basically in Minnesota, the legislature has not been really functional. So it's been a terrible experience, and so, the good legislation we have has been captured by bad legislation, and then the governor vetoes bad legislation, or it doesn't even get out of committee. So that whole experience is totally frustrating. So we get some things, but it is really frustrating.
I'm going to you and you and you and you.
Yeah. I was just, lately I heard about, on the internet or something about, they found a radical solution to PTSD. I don't know what that is. I thought, well, that's what I was going to write a letter. I was going to write a letter to the editor and say, I know a radical way to stop PTSD. Stop having these stupid wars. But I didn't, because they don't think of the simple solution. So all the time not all the time, but a lot of time you watch the story on TV and a vet goes to the VA to get treatment and they don't admit him. So he comes back and sits in his car and kills himself. I mean, that's a lot of, I've heard several stories like that, not maybe in his car, but then he goes home and kills himself. So then you immediately, to my mind, it's saying, well, what's wrong with these VAs? Why don't they admit this guy? So I blame the VA, and I guess that's not the right thing to do.
Well, let me just say that, first of all, 70% of the veterans who kill themselves have never been to a VA or gotten any kind of help.
And they don't admit them when they do go somewhere.
No, that is not the case. They have never been, of the 20 veterans every day who kill themselves, 70% have never, ever gone to a VA. It's not that they didn't get admitted. It's that they never went. And,
but the story that makes the media is
yeah,
the ones that...
well, there are people who make mistakes, and we don't actually know.
Of course.
I mean, Daniel Summers, if you want to look up a case, who has become the poster child for sort of veteran suicide, had multiple deployments to Iraq, 400 concussions, wrote a suicide note that basically said it was the DOD, it was the war, but his parents feel real guilty for encouraging him to go and now blame the VA. You know, I'm sure that there are some people who may be turned away, but the real problem of veteran suicide is not the people who are turned away, but the vets who listen to the NRA's anti-government rants and don't go to the VA because they don't want the government to take away their guns. And the NRA is killing veterans because of this crap that they're putting out. And Congress is killing veterans by not, you know, fully funding the VA and giving eligibility to everybody. And the, you know, the bad paper, I mean, we could go on all night, you know, the other than honorable discharges. So maybe, I'm sure there's been mistakes, but you really have to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, the reality is that veteran suicide has been reduced by something like 40% for veterans who, I mean, it's either 20% or 40%, it's in my book, for veterans who go to the VA, right? And this idea, this is the Koch brothers, you know, that is what they want you to believe. And if you read the book, I spent a day at the Veterans Crisis Line, and if you think it's a fun job to listen to, for 8 hours, you know, to veterans who are telling you that they've got a gun to their heads or to their family in the next room, next. I mean, I was blown away. And if they don't have people answering phones quickly enough, it's because they don't have enough people, because they won't fund it.
What I'm going to say is not meant at all to contradict or, but I think there's another dimension to it. I'm a veteran of the anti-war movement. I never thought there was anything heroic about dropping napalm on Vietnamese children. And so my point is, as a country, we've never dealt with the reality, the horror. You know, we fetishize, we say all these brave servicemen. But my experience as working, and I'm not defending private medical care at all, because I've been part of that system for 40 years. One thing, for example, I was a teacher of family medicine doctors. The majority of antidepressants and whatnot are given by family practice doctors, not psychiatrists. I suspect, I don't know the data, maybe you do, the majority of vets go to family practice docs more than they go to the Veterans Minister. Just the regular, and I worked with doctors who were war people like me. One of the things that's really, people get traumatized not just by seeing their buddy killed. One of the most dramatic things that we don't like to acknowledge is how awful it is to a human being to kill another human being, especially if they're children. And about 15, 20 years ago, I wanted to work at the VA, and I went to this orientation, and the gist of it was they didn't want therapists asking about people's moral views, their emotional experiences, and I would never get hired, with my anti-war values. But as a therapist and an expert on post-traumatic stress, people can say, many people have said, I feel terrible, I killed a child, I don't know how to live with this.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, and I know that, I'm sure there's very good therapists, in the VA, but there's still a lot of therapists who don't know how to have those kind of discussions.
So thank you for raising that. So not in this book, but in another book I did, Battle for Veterans Healthcare, I think you'll find that it's changed. And now there's a big focus on moral injury and in the VA. And they've actually developed, Shira McGinn in San Francisco has developed, because they discovered that there were a subset of veterans that weren't treated by weren't helped by the conventional therapies, PE and CT and stuff. And they developed, they realized that those veterans had killed someone or had some form of moral injury, and they developed what they call the killing scale and whole treatments specifically for people who've killed people. So I think that's quite different now. I mean, I think that, look, I don't like the notion, because I'm an anti-war person myself, that the way this country defines service to country is only by teaching people how to kill people. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of, ways you can serve your country, but I don't want to, I mean, that's not the purpose of this book, but I have not found that. I think the VA there's lots of places and lots of different VAs, but this whole focus on moral injury. And the other thing is, you don't have to be in combat to get PTSD or MST. I mean, or chronic pain or whatever. I mean, I know a lot of vets who have, look at the Paris Island, thing where this horrible sadistic drill sergeants, and a guy killed himself, and a bunch of people have PTSD. You don't have to leave the continental United States. I think war is a really bad idea, and training people to kill people is the worst idea. And, I don't recommend it. But David, you had something that you wanted.
Actually, get David Logs in there next.
I don't need the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what it's about controlling the narrative.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, from a veteran's point of view, the idea of being veterans, rightly or wrongly, is very, very important to you see it at football games, baseball games, the flyovers, everything is honoring the veterans. Well, I think the narrative has to be emphasized is that Democrats and Republicans have voted gleefully to this multi-billion-dollar defense budget.
Right.
And we're spending trillions of dollars on defense systems that may be obsolete by the time they come online, and yet it's spare change for the veterans.
Exactly.
And this is what the idea is, that they starve the VA and then they say, "Oh, you're not doing your job." And that narrative has to be simplified and hit an emotional point of view. And I think as veterans, we can speak powerfully to that and say, "Look, you ask people to serve their country, you come back and you're giving them nickels and dimes." And that's the narrative. We have this bloated defense budget, and we're throwing nickels and dimes at the people that are put their lives on the line for the whole thing. Whether it was right or wrong or bullshit, which I think is a lot of it was real bullshit. Okay, but now you're having to come back and pay the price all over again.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I mean, I just think you're absolutely right, and I also think that we need to say, and you're giving us nickels and dimes, and we're beating the private sector with the nickels and dimes. So can you imagine what we could do, with 5s and 10s, right? I mean, our outcomes are better with peanuts, and, to get poor outcomes, you're willing to spend 4 times as much, which is what it'll cost. So, but that's why I think veterans have to speak up about their stories, I really want to give people who haven't had a chance to talk, and then we can...
What you just said, it feels like, as somebody with PTSD, moral injury, it feels like that betrayal all over. That's what it feels. But I think the one thing that I want everybody to go out of here with tonight is, if you tell a lie often enough, it'll become the truth. And since 2014, what have we heard? Wait times, and we want to give now veterans choice, right?
Yeah.
We want to give veterans choice, but what does that mean? Choice. Choice for what? For wait times, because the wait times that, I called into Minnesota Public Radio here within the last week. They had a program on mental health care in the state. And sorry, I can't recall exactly what I said in regard to mental health care, because I'm one of those old guys. But nevertheless, what I said to them, aside from the fact that 55% of the counties in the country don't have any mental health practitioners, was that the VA has absolutely the best mental health care in the country, bar none. But then when I got off of the phone, what did Carrie Miller come back with? Wait times. Wait times, wait times, wait times. That's all they can read. It's like a mantra.
Yeah.
And it's, what are we doing about the wait times? Now, we've got to counter that every single day. Sorry to use the language, but in the library too. We've got to counter that. And the other, so there's two things. So there's that. We really need to counter that wait time. Among other things, most of the appointments now are within 5 days for general medical purposes. And any of us can get in who are qualified to get into the VA, either into the emergency or urgent care, same day. And oftentimes, you may actually have the chance to go and see your own private care doctor if they have an opening on that day. I know because I've done that many times. But now let's see if I can remember the other thing that was.
You mean primary care?
Primary care, yes, thanks, Mike. But there's something else that was on my mind just a moment ago that I wanted you to take out of here. Besides that choice thing and the wait time business. And we may have to wait a couple minutes and it'll come back. I lost it. Sorry. Anyway.
Walk out with a book.
Yeah. But, oh, I know what it was.
There we go.
This small group can't do it on their own. Veterans can't do it on their own. I should say Vets for Peace can't do it on their own. That small activist group within this very small group within another slightly larger small group. And not even people from the Legion and the VFW, because, you know, I equate the Legion and VFW as not unlike the heads of the national unions. You know, the people in Washington who represent VFW and Legion, they'll sell you out in a moment because they think they're in club, you know, the rubbing elbows with power, and they'll sell the rank and file down the drain every single time. Okay, but so we have to enlist the broader public. I was on KFAI radio yesterday for an hour. You can actually listen to it if you just go to KFAI and look for Don Olson's program, Northern Sun News. And you can listen to it for the next 2 weeks. Tape it if you have a tape recorder yet. And take it around. You know, there's a little bit of things that we didn't cover here tonight. But the primary thing that I tried to emphasize yesterday is we have to enlist that broader public out there. And I tried to do that by throwing out a big long list of far more than Suzanne did tonight, of all the list of the things that the VA is responsible for that has covered everybody's butts out there in the public, their health, through their research and the development over the years, and all that doctor training and nurse training and medical techs. You know, those are the things that the general public needs to, it has to mean something to them, right? So you gotta sell that story. Be a salesman.
So I think that sadly, we have to end with that incredible speech.
One
because-
comment that I have to make, and I'm just bold, and that is, you had mentioned earlier, and you alluded to it twice, that if the VA system, if they try to privatize it,
Yes.
I've worked 43 years as a nurse in many areas within nursing care in the private system. The private system is not equipped at all to handle this, and it is getting worse.
Oh, yeah.
It is getting worse, not by the decade, no, it is getting worse by the day.
Yeah.
Staffing issues. We have a for-profit system in the private sector.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Right.
So that needs to be out there also.
Yeah, and so, where's my book? Oh, it's over here. So I have a whole chapter in my book about the failures of the private sector, and very specifically kind of geared to these wait times and other issues. And, you know, I think people need to take these journalists, I don't know if you can change it. It's a kind of mantra, you know, they get into this, you know, big labor, I mean, VA wait times. It's like, you know, the VA wait times was like 5 years ago, but they're still bringing it up. People also need to go to them. They need to go to the Legion, they need to go to the VFW, and they need to say, what are you doing about this act, the Mission Act? You know, you broke it, you own it. You better, is that going to be your legacy? And so there's so much we could do. But I want to thank you for coming. And I'm selling my book. I'm glad to autograph it. I'm going to give you a present. I don't know. Are you allowed to take presents? Don't. Then you better buy it. Because we're all getting you, you know. These are voters here, right?
Can I just say one thing, because it's to follow up to what Dave said? Because this program is being live streamed, and that video will be available.
Okay.
We'll make sure we get it on the Veterans for Peace Chapter 27 page, and maybe on the website, and other places. And if you are interested in getting the link, talk to this woman right back here who's doing the video.
And please get some stickers and bumper stickers, and I'll be right there. And
Great